I stood in the rain, gripping the pregnancy test so tightly that my fingers ached. The two pink lines stared back at me, proof that everything was about to change. My heart pounded as I looked up at Adrien, my lips parting to speak the words that had been sitting on my tongue for days. I'm pregnant. For a second, just a second, hope flickered in my chest. But then I saw it. The way his expression didn't soften, the way his eyes darted away like he wished he hadn't heard me. I'm sorry, Sabrina. It's always been Emily. His words didn't just hurt, they destroyed me. The world around me blurred, the streetlights hazy through my tears. The sound of rain pelting the pavement was deafening, but all I could hear was the echo of his voice. I swallowed, trying to breathe, trying to understand. You don't mean that. My voice shook, but I didn't care. Adrien, I'm having your child. He flinched, but his feet stayed planted. He wasn't running to me. He wasn't grabbing my hands, telling me that this changed everything. Instead, he just stared, his jaw tight. Sabrina, he sighed, looking away as if I was an inconvenience. I didn't plan for this. I let out a shaky laugh, more out of disbelief than anything else. You didn't plan for this? My fingers trembled as I loosened my grip, the pregnancy test slipping from my grasp and landing in a puddle at his feet. The raindrops blurred the result, washing away the proof of what should have been the start of our family. I looked past Adrien to the woman standing behind him, Emily. She didn't even try to hide her smirk, her fingers curled possessively around his arm. And that's when I knew. I was never his choice. Lightning flashed across the sky. I forced myself to stand taller, to ignore the crushing pain in my chest. If he didn't want me, if he didn't want us, then I wouldn't beg. I took a slow, trembling breath. Goodbye, Adrien. Then I turned and walked away, the rain swallowing my sobs. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to disappear. What I didn't realize was that life had already started growing inside me. And by the time Adrien understood what he had lost, it would be too late. I don't remember how long I walked in the rain that night. My feet moved on their own, aimless, my body numb to the cold. I could still hear Adrien's voice echoing in my head, those 5 words cutting deeper than any wound ever could. I'm sorry, Sabrina. It's always been Emily. Over and over, like a cruel mantra, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I pressed a hand to my stomach as if I could shield the tiny life growing inside me from the heartbreak crashing through my chest. It felt surreal. Just an hour ago, I had rehearsed 100 different ways to tell Adrien that we were going to be a family, that he was going to be a father. But I never thought I'd be walking away from him instead, my fingers empty, the pregnancy test abandoned in a puddle like it had never mattered at all. I felt hollow. The rain blurred the city lights around me as I stumbled forward, barely aware of where I was going. My vision swam, exhaustion dragging at my limbs, but I kept walking. If I stopped, if I let myself think, the pain would become unbearable. I should have gone home. I should have found shelter, dried off, tried to sleep. But my apartment felt suffocating now. Everything inside it held a memory of him. Of us. I couldn't go back. So I just kept moving. I don't know how long I wandered the streets, my soaked clothes clinging to my skin, my body trembling from the cold. My head felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. It was getting harder to breathe. The city lights seemed dimmer now, the edges of my vision darkening with every unsteady step. Then suddenly the ground tilted beneath me. A sharp pain shot through my skull as I collapsed onto the pavement, the world spinning violently. I gasped, struggling to stay conscious, but my body wouldn't move. I could hear voices, distant, muffled, like they were coming from the end of a long tunnel. Someone was shouting. Someone was calling for help. But all I could think about was the tiny heartbeat inside me, the fragile life that had no idea its mother had already lost the will to fight. Then everything went black. The first thing I heard was the beeping of a heart monitor. Slow, steady. A cruel reminder that I was still alive when I felt like I shouldn't be. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I forced them open, wincing as the bright hospital lights burned my retinas. My entire body ached, a dull pain thrumming through my skull. I tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed against my shoulder, keeping me down. You need to rest. The voice was gentle but unfamiliar. I blinked up at the woman standing beside my bed, middle-aged, kind eyes, dressed in a nurse's uniform. I swallowed, my throat painfully dry. Where am I? My voice barely came out, hoarse and weak. The emergency room, she answered softly. You collapsed from exhaustion and severe dehydration. A passerby found you unconscious on the street and called for an ambulance. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. The memories of the night before crashed into me all at once, and suddenly I could feel everything. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the loneliness that had driven me to wander aimlessly through the storm. I forced a shaky breath. "Hi, baby." The nurse's expression softened. "The baby is okay. You were lucky. But you need to take better care of yourself, Sabrina." I flinched at the sound of my own name. It felt strange to hear it from someone who didn't know me, someone who didn't know that I had just lost everything. Lucky. I wasn't lucky. I had lost the father of my child before he even knew what he was leaving behind. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I bit them back, turning my face away. I couldn't afford to break down here. I had no one. No family. No one to call. And worst of all, Adrien had no idea I was even here. Maybe he wouldn't care. Maybe it was better this way. But as I stared at the ceiling, my body weak, my heart shattered, I made myself one promise. I would never let him find out about this child. Because if he could walk away from me so easily, then I refused to give him the chance to walk away from our baby too. I would raise this child alone. Even if it killed me. I don't remember leaving the hospital. One moment I was lying in that stiff white bed, listening to the distant beeping of machines, and the next I was stepping out into the world again. Alone. The rain had stopped, but the cold lingered, sinking into my bones as I clutched the thin hospital discharge papers in my hand. I had nothing else. No one waiting for me. No messages on my phone, no missed calls. Not that I expected one. Adrien didn't know. He wouldn't know. I tightened my coat around myself, my other hand instinctively resting on my stomach. It was still flat, still easy to pretend that nothing had changed. But I knew better. My body was no longer just mine. The nurse had said I was lucky. That the baby had survived. At first I didn't know how to feel about that. There was a part of me, the weak, selfish part, that wondered if it would have been easier if fate had decided for me. If I had woken up to an empty womb, if I didn't have to make the choice myself. But that choice had already been made the moment I collapsed on that street. This baby survived. And if this tiny life inside me was strong enough to hold on, then I had to be strong enough to keep going. I packed my things that same night. The apartment I had shared with Adrien held too many memories. Every inch of it reminded me of him. The way he used to laugh as he made a mess in the kitchen, the way his scent clung to the pillows, the way he had once whispered that he couldn't imagine his life without me. I couldn't stay. Not in this city, not in the shadow of the man who had so easily chosen someone else. If I did, I knew I'd break all over again. So I left. I bought a one-way ticket to a place where no one knew my name, where I could start over without the weight of Adrien's ghost haunting my every step. It wasn't a grand city, not some picturesque escape. Just a quiet town where I could disappear. Where I could figure out how to be a mother, how to survive on my own. The first few weeks were the hardest. Finding a job was nearly impossible with my body still weak from the collapse. And no one wanted to hire a pregnant woman they assumed would be gone in a few months. I took what I could. Odd jobs, under-the-table work that paid just enough to keep a roof over my head. The apartment I found was nothing like the one I left behind. It was small, barely enough space to turn around without bumping into something, but it was mine. No reminders of him. No traces of the life I had lost. At night, when the loneliness crept in, I would place my hand on my stomach and whisper softly, "It's just us now, little one." I don't know if I was saying it for the baby or for myself. The months passed slowly, each one marking a new milestone. The first flutter of movement so faint I thought I imagined it. The first time I saw the baby on an ultrasound screen, tiny and real. The moment I heard the heartbeat, steady and strong, filling the empty spaces in my chest where love used to live. I didn't cry when I left Adrien. I didn't cry when I collapsed on that street or when I woke up in that hospital bed alone. But when I heard my baby's heartbeat for the first time, I broke. I pressed my hand over my mouth, shaking with silent sobs, the weight of everything crashing down all at once. This wasn't just an escape. This wasn't just me running from my past. This was a beginning. A life that belonged to me and the child I was carrying. And no matter how much it hurt, no matter how many times I wondered if I was strong enough to do this alone, I made a promise that day. Adrien would never know. I wouldn't let him take this from me. I wouldn't let him come back into my life only to leave again. He had made his choice. Now I was making mine. and I would do whatever it took to protect the only family I had left. I used to believe that choosing Emily would make everything feel right again. That once I walked away from Sabrina, all the confusion, all the hesitation would disappear. I was wrong. The first few weeks should have been the happiest of my life. I had Emily back, the woman I had once fought so hard to keep. The one I thought I could never live without. And yet something felt. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I just needed time. That after everything with Sabrina, after the way things ended, I was just adjusting. But the truth was something I wasn't ready to admit. I had never felt this emptiness before. Emily was everything she had always been. Beautiful, charming, the person I used to dream about on sleepless nights. She smiled at me the way she used to, her hands soft in mine, her voice gentle when she said my name. But it didn't feel the same. I caught myself thinking about Sabrina more than I wanted to admit. I would reach for my phone late at night, scrolling through old messages, only to find her name missing from my contacts. She had erased me completely. At first I thought she just needed time. That eventually she would reach out, yell at me, tell me how much she hated me. Something. Anything. But weeks passed, then months, and I heard nothing. She had disappeared. I told myself I should be relieved. That this was what I wanted. But every time I saw a familiar street, I found myself searching for her. Every time I passed a cafe we used to visit, I wondered if she still drank her coffee the same way. I told myself that I had made the right choice, but then why did it feel like I had lost something I could never get back? Emily sensed it before I even said anything. "You're thinking about her again, aren't you?" she asked one night, her voice tight with frustration. I looked up from my untouched dinner, my stomach twisting at the accusation. "Emily, don't." "Don't what?" she snapped, shoving her fork down. "Don't notice the way you barely look at me anymore? Don't feel the distance between us? God, Adrien, if you regret choosing me, just say it." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Guess she was right. I didn't say it though. I didn't admit that every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sabrina walking away from me in the rain. I didn't tell her that I woke up some nights, heart racing, wondering why I felt like I was missing something important. Instead, I reached across the table, forcing a smile. "I love you, Emily. That hasn't changed." She didn't look convinced. But she didn't push me that night. The truth was, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had everything I thought I wanted. I had Emily. But I had never felt more empty. It wasn't until much later that I realized what I had truly lost. And by then it was already too late. I had never known pain like this. The contractions tore through me, relentless and unforgiving, each wave leaving me gasping for breath. My fingers clutched the hospital sheets, knuckles white as I tried to focus on anything but the unbearable pressure threatening to rip me apart. I had read the books, watched the videos, listened to the nurses. I knew what to expect. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer force of it, the way my body seemed to be breaking apart and rebuilding itself all at once. "You're doing great, Sabrina," the nurse encouraged, her voice calm but firm. "Just a little longer. A little longer." I had been in labor for hours, each second stretching into eternity. The room was bright, too bright, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the sterile white walls. The beeping machines, the scent of antiseptic, the cool sweat clinging to my skin. It all felt distant, like I was watching myself from outside my own body. Another contraction came and I bit down on my lip, refusing to scream, refusing to let the pain swallow me whole. I had come this far alone. I would finish this alone. No one was waiting outside for me. No warm hands to squeeze mine, no familiar voice whispering words of comfort. Adrien should have been here. He should have known. But I had made my choice and I had no regrets. I had built a life without him. I had survived without him. And now I was bringing our child into the world alone. A sob caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Not now. I couldn't fall apart now. "All right, Sabrina," the doctor's voice cut through the haze. "One more push. You can do this." I clenched my teeth, bracing myself. Every muscle in my body tensed as I gave everything I had left, every ounce of strength, every bit of pain, every lingering piece of my shattered heart. And then suddenly, a cry. A piercing, desperate wail filled the room, louder than anything I had ever heard. My breath hitched. My body sagged against the bed, exhaustion hitting me like a tidal wave. But none of it mattered. Because my baby was here. I barely had the strength to lift my arms, but when the nurse placed the tiny, warm bundle against my chest, I felt something shift inside me. Something deep, something powerful, something that made every tear, every heartbreak, every lonely night worth it. I looked down, blinking through my exhaustion, and there he was. My son. His skin was soft and warm, his tiny fists curling as he let out another cry. His hair was dark, damp from birth, and when he blinked up at me, his unfocused eyes were the same shade as Adrien's. The resemblance sent a sharp ache through my chest, but I pushed it away. Adrien wasn't here. He didn't deserve to be. I traced a trembling finger down my son's cheek, my heart swelling in a way I had never known was possible. He was so small, so perfect, so mine. Noah, I whispered, the name rolling off my tongue like it had always belonged to him. My sweet boy. His tiny body trembled against me as his cries softened, his warmth seeping into my skin. Tears blurred my vision, but this time I didn't hold them back. For the first time in months, they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of love, of strength, of the life I had just brought into the world, the only thing that truly mattered now. Noah was mine, and I would never let him feel like he wasn't enough. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, closing my eyes, holding him close. He was safe. He was loved. And I would never let anyone take him away from me. Not even his father. I never thought I'd see him again. For years I had built my life on the foundation of that belief. I told myself that Adrien belonged to a past that no longer existed, that he had made his choice, and that our paths would never cross again. And yet fate had other plans. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the sun was warm against my skin and the world felt quiet, safe. Noah's small hand was wrapped in mine as we walked through the park, his little feet kicking excitedly as he chattered about the ducks in the pond. His voice, so full of wonder, made my heart swell. This was our world now. Just the two of us. Noah, slow down, I laughed as he tugged at my hand, his energy boundless. His dark curls bounced as he turned to grin at me, his bright brown eyes, Adrien's eyes, gleaming with mischief. I loved him more than I had ever thought possible. He was my entire world. And then in an instant that world tilted. It was just a glimpse at first. A familiar figure across the park, moving through the crowd. Someone I hadn't seen in years, but whose presence was burned into my soul. I froze. It couldn't be. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him, my heart slamming against my ribs. He looked the same and yet different. Older. His once carefree expression was shadowed, his features sharper, more defined. There was something restless in the way he carried himself, as if he was searching for something without knowing what. I stood there, rooted to the ground, unable to move. I had spent years imagining this moment. What I would say if I ever saw him again. If I would tell him the truth, if I would let the pain of the past spill out, or if I would simply walk away without a second glance. But I hadn't planned for the most important factor. Noah. My son, who had no idea that the man just a few feet away from us was his father. I gripped his small hand tighter, my pulse racing. I needed to leave. No. Before Adrien saw us. Before he saw him. But fate wasn't that kind. Noah, be careful. I called out as he suddenly let go of my hand, running ahead toward the ducks near the pond. His giggles filled the air and I moved to follow him. And then Adrien turned. Our eyes met. The world seemed to stop. For a moment neither of us moved, neither of us breathed. His gaze locked onto mine, his expression shifting from surprise to something deeper, something unreadable. He took a step forward as if to make sure I was real. And in that moment I saw it, the flash of emotions in his eyes, the memories, the pain, the regret. But none of that mattered. Because then his gaze flickered past me. And landed on Noah. Everything inside me screamed. Adrien's entire body tensed, his eyes widening as he took in the small boy standing just a few feet away, completely oblivious to the storm that had just erupted in my chest. I could see the thoughts racing through his mind, the way he was trying to make sense of it. The way he was putting the pieces together before I could stop him. I turned to Noah, my voice shaky. Sweetheart, we need to go. Noah pouted, his little hands still reaching for the ducks, but I didn't give him a choice. I scooped him into my arms, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. I needed to leave. I needed to disappear just like I had all those years ago. But before I could turn away, Adrien's voice cut through the chaos. Sabrina. I squeezed my eyes shut. The past had finally caught up with me. And there was no escaping it this time. Hearing Adrien say my name after all these years sent a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't just his voice, it was the way he said it. Like I was someone he had been searching for. Like I was someone he never expected to find. But I didn't want to be found. Noah shifted in my arms, wiggling slightly, but I held him tighter, forcing my legs to move. I turned on my heel, ready to disappear into the crowd, but I wasn't fast enough. Sabrina, wait. I felt his presence before I even saw him move. And then, suddenly he was in front of me. Too close. I inhaled sharply, my pulse racing, my grip on Noah tightening. I hadn't been this close to Adrien in years. And yet here he was, standing in front of me, looking at me like I was a ghost he couldn't believe was real. His eyes, those deep brown eyes I used to lose myself in, scanned my face, searching for something, anything. I could see the questions forming in his mind, see the confusion swirling behind his gaze. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to stay calm. I can't do this, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I have to go. But Adrien wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze had shifted, down toward the little boy in my arms. Everything inside me froze. Noah blinked up at him, his tiny face scrunching in curiosity. Adrien's breathing hitched and I saw it happen. The exact moment realization slammed into him like a wrecking ball. His lips parted slightly, his entire body tensing. I could see the way his mind was racing, the way he was trying to make sense of what was in front of him. He looked at Noah. Really looked at him. The dark curls. The familiar shape of his eyes. The way his little nose scrunched up when he was deep in thought, just like Adrien's used to. The resemblance was undeniable. And Adrien wasn't stupid. I could practically hear his heart pounding as his gaze slowly lifted back to mine, disbelief and something dangerously close to devastation written all over his face. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Sabrina, is he? I knew what he was asking. And I knew that if I didn't stop this now, there would be no turning back. Panic surged through me, my fingers trembling as I adjusted Noah in my arms. I have to go, I said again, my voice firmer this time. I stepped around him, my legs moving faster now. But Adrien grabbed my wrist, his touch burning through my skin. Tell me, he demanded, his voice breaking slightly. Tell me the truth. I ripped my arm free, swallowing the lump in my throat. He's my son, I whispered, blinking back tears. That's all you need to know. And then, before he could say another word, before he could shatter the fragile life I had built, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my back like fire, filled with the weight of a truth that could no longer be hidden. Adrien knew. And everything was about to change. I barely remembered how I got home. The moment I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me, pressing my forehead against the cool wood as I tried to catch my breath. My entire body was trembling, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Adrien wasn't supposed to find me. I had spent years making sure our paths would never cross again. I had moved to a different city, changed everything about my life, built a world where Noah and I were safe, where he would never have to know the man who had once chosen someone else over us. And yet, in one cruel twist of fate, everything had come crashing down. Noah tugged at my sweater, his little voice breaking through my spiraling thoughts. Mommy. I forced myself to breathe, to swallow the panic clawing at my throat. I turned, crouching down to meet his gaze. His big brown eyes, so full of innocent curiosity, made my heart ache. Are you okay, sweetheart? I asked, brushing a curl from his forehead. He nodded, but his tiny hands reached for my face, his fingers pressing against my cheeks as if he could sense the turmoil inside me. You're sad, he said simply. I let out a shaky breath, pressing a kiss to his forehead. No, baby. Mommy's just tired. It was a lie. But it was the only thing I could give him right now. I scooped him into my arms, holding him close as I carried him to his room. I needed a moment. I needed to think. But first I had to make sure Noah was okay, that he was safe in the only world I had ever known how to give him. Once he was settled in bed, his tiny body curled beneath his favorite blanket, I sat beside him, running my fingers through his soft curls. He blinked up at me sleepily, his little hand resting on my arm. Mommy. Yes, baby. The man at the park, he looked at me funny. My stomach twisted, my grip tightening slightly. What do you mean, sweetheart? Noah yawned, his eyes fluttering closed. He looked like he knew me. I felt my chest tighten, my heart beat loud in my ears. Because he did know him. And I had no idea what Adrien was going to do now that he did. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adrien's face. His expression when he looked at Noah. The way his entire body had tensed as realization sank in. The way he had demanded the truth, his voice shaking. I had run before he could get the answer he was looking for. But I knew Adrien. He wasn't going to stop until he had it. And I was right. The next morning the knocking started. I froze, my hand tightening around the coffee mug I had barely touched. The sound was firm, persistent, echoing through my small apartment like a warning. No one ever knocked on my door. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. I sucked in a sharp breath, my grip on the mug so tight I thought it might crack. He found me. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could wait it out, hope that he would eventually walk away. But then his voice came, muffled through the door but unmistakably his. Sabrina, I know you're in there. I closed my eyes, pressing my back against the wall, willing my heart to stop racing. Please, he continued, his voice lower now, rough around the edges. I just want to talk. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. Oh, I can't do this. But Adrien wasn't giving up. I need to know the truth. Pause. Then softer, more broken. Is he mine? The words hit like a knife to my chest. I had spent years preparing for this moment, convincing myself that if it ever came I would be strong enough to lie. Strong enough to tell him that Noah wasn't his, that he had nothing to do with our lives. But now, standing here with my hands trembling and my heart threatening to shatter, I wasn't sure if I could. The knocking came again, this time softer. Please, Sabrina. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. I could open the door. I could face him, tell him what I should have told him years ago. Or I could walk away from it all again, pretend like he never found us. But something inside me knew. This time, Adrien wasn't going to disappear. And I didn't know if I was ready for what that meant. I didn't open the door. I stood there, my breath uneven, my hands curled into fists as Adrien knocked again, his voice slipping through the cracks. Sabrina, please. He sounded different. Desperate. Not the Adrien I had known all those years ago. Not the man who had stood in the rain and told me he had chosen Emily. This Adrien wasn't so sure of himself. But I didn't care. He didn't get to sound lost. He didn't get to show up here after all this time, demanding answers he had never cared to ask before. Noah's soft breathing filled the quiet apartment, his small frame curled up under his blankets, blissfully unaware that the world outside our door was on the verge of breaking apart. And I would do anything, to keep it from shattering. My back pressed against the door, my knees weak as I forced myself to speak. Go away, Adrien. Silence. For a second I thought maybe he had left, maybe he would take the hint and disappear from my life for good. But then his voice came again, quieter this time. He's mine, isn't he? My chest tightened. I swallowed, forcing the words I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. It doesn't matter. He let out a shaky breath, something between a laugh and a scoff. Doesn't matter? His voice was sharp now, edged with something raw. I have a son, and you think that doesn't matter? I squeezed my eyes shut. I had known this day would come, but I had never prepared for how much it would hurt. He's my son, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't get to claim him just because you saw him once. Sabrina, open the door. No. A heavy silence followed. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to breathe, trying to steady myself. Then after a long pause he spoke again. I deserved to know him. The words sent a flash of fury through me, so fast, so sharp, that I barely recognized myself when I let out a bitter laugh. You deserve nothing. I pushed off the door, pacing the small space of my apartment as my voice rose. Where were you, Adrien? Where were you when I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if my baby would even make it? Where were you when I worked 2 jobs just to make sure he had everything he needed? When he cried in the middle of the night, when he took his first steps, when he said his first word? Where were you? I didn't realize I was shaking until my voice broke on the last word. I heard him exhale sharply on the other side. I didn't know. That's not an excuse. I would have been there if you had told me. I spun toward the door, anger tightening in my chest. You don't get to say that. You made your choice, Adrien. You chose Emily. You let me walk away that night, knowing damn well I was breaking. The hallway outside was silent. I bit my lip, trying to will the tears away. I had to be strong, I whispered. I had to survive. And I did. Without you. Another pause. Then quietly, I want to see him. I let out a shaky breath. No. Sabrina. No, I forced steel into my voice, into the parts of me that still felt too fragile when it came to him. You don't get to walk in and play father now. Noah doesn't know you. And I won't let you confuse him. A beat of silence. Then his voice broken. I never stopped thinking about you. I inhaled sharply. I hated him for saying that. For making me remember things I had spent years trying to forget. For making me wonder what it would have been like if he had chosen me instead. But it didn't change anything. Noah wasn't his to claim. And I would never let him take my son away from me. My fingers curled around the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. Go home, Adrien. He didn't move. I could feel him standing there just on the other side. Then finally he exhaled. This isn't over. I closed my eyes. I knew he was right. But I wished more than anything that it was. I told myself that Adrien would give up. That after our confrontation at my door he would realize there was no place for him in Noah's life and walk away, just like he had all those years ago. But I had underestimated him. Because Adrien didn't disappear. He showed up. And again. And again. First it was subtle. A car parked outside my building that I pretended not to recognize. A glimpse of him near the coffee shop down the street, his eyes searching, lingering for a moment too long before he turned away. Then he got bolder. I saw him in the park where I took Noah to play, standing at a distance, his expression unreadable as he watched from across the field. He never approached, never crossed the invisible boundary I had set, but his presence was suffocating. And I hated that I still noticed him. That I could still sense him before I even saw him. That even after all these years, my body still betrayed me, still remembered what it was like to love him. But love had nothing to do with this. One evening after work I walked out of the small bakery where I had been picking up Noah's favorite pastries, and there he was, leaning against his car, arms crossed, waiting for me like he belonged there. I nearly turned around, but I was too exhausted to keep running. I met his gaze, forcing my voice to stay steady. This is stalking, you know. His lips twitched, but there was no amusement in his eyes. I just want to talk. I let out a slow breath. There's nothing left to say. That's not true. His voice was quiet but firm. You know that's not true. I clenched my jaw. Adrien. I've been a fool, he cut in, stepping closer. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. And now I find out I lost more than just you. I refused to let those words sink in. I forced myself to look at him, to really look at him. There was something different in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. Lost. Not the confident, self-assured Adrien I had once loved. But that wasn't my problem. I straightened, gripping the paper bag in my hands. You don't get to do this. You don't get to come back after all this time and pretend like you care. He flinched, and for a moment I thought he might back off. But then he ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. You don't understand. The night you left He stopped, shaking his head. I thought I was making the right choice. I thought Emily was what I wanted. But the second you were gone, I knew I had made the worst mistake of my life. I sucked in a sharp breath, my pulse hammering. I looked for you, he admitted, his voice rough. I searched everywhere. But you were gone. It was like you vanished into thin air. Good. I had made sure of that. I forced myself to stay cold, to ignore the part of me that wanted to believe him. And now you want a second chance? I let out a hollow laugh. Sorry, Adrien. I don't have one to give you. His jaw tightened. I'm not here for a second chance with you, Sabrina. I'm here for my son. My stomach twisted, ice spreading through my veins. Noah isn't your son, I said, my voice deadly quiet. He's mine. His eyes darkened. You can't erase me from his life. I lifted my chin. I already did. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then after a long moment, Adrien exhaled. I want to see him. I shook my head. No. Sabrina. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. But he's my son and I need to know him. I closed my eyes, gripping the bag in my hands like it could hold me together. I can be patient, Adrien continued. I won't force my way in. But I'm not going away. A lump formed in my throat. I hated him for this. For not giving up. For forcing me to face the one thing I had spent years avoiding. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. I turned and walked away, pretending I couldn't feel his gaze burning into my back. But for the first time since I had left him behind, I wasn't sure if I could keep running. I thought I could ignore him. I told myself that if I stayed firm, if I kept saying no, Adrien would eventually give up. That he would realize Noah wasn't his to claim, that he had lost the right to be a father the moment he let me walk away without a fight. I was wrong. Because life has a cruel way of forcing you to face the things you fear the most. And nothing could have prepared me for the moment I almost lost everything. It started with a fever. Noah had always been a strong, healthy boy. A little sniffle here and there, an occasional cold in the winter, but nothing serious. So when he complained of a headache one evening, I brushed his curls back and kissed his forehead, telling him it would be okay. By morning he was burning up. His small body trembled under the blankets, his breathing shallow as he whimpered my name. Panic gripped me as I scooped him into my arms, whispering soft reassurances that I didn't even believe myself. I rushed him to the hospital, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely think. Every second felt like an eternity as they wheeled him away, nurses speaking in hushed tones, machines beeping in ways that made my stomach churn. I should have been strong. I had survived everything life had thrown at me. I had built a life from nothing, protected my son from the past, stood tall even when my heart had been shattered. But watching Noah's tiny frame lying so still in that hospital bed, his skin pale, his lips dry, broke me in a way I had never known before. I held his little hand, pressing kisses to his knuckles, whispering prayers to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. "Please," I murmured, my voice shaking. "Please, baby, just open your eyes." A doctor came in not long after, her expression calm but serious. "We ran some tests. His immune system is fighting something, but his white blood cell count is dangerously low." I swallowed, my throat dry. "What does that mean?" She sighed. "We need a compatible donor. A parent is usually the best option." I barely heard the rest. My mind was already reeling. I was Noah's mother. His only parent. There was no one else. I nodded quickly. "Test me. Do whatever you need to do." They took my blood, but when they came back, their faces told me everything before they even spoke. "I'm sorry," the doctor said softly. "You're not a match." The world seemed to tilt. No, that wasn't possible. I was his mother. I had carried him, loved him, fought for him. How could my blood not be enough? "We need to find another donor quickly," she continued, her voice gentle. "Is his father in the picture?" I closed my eyes. For years I had worked so hard to keep Adrien out of our lives. To erase his presence, to make sure Noah never had to know the pain of being unwanted. And now life was laughing in my face. I had no choice. With shaking hands I reached for my phone. The number I never thought I'd dial again stared back at me. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed call. It rang once. Twice. Then his voice came through, rough, hesitant. "Sabrina." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "Adrien. I need you." Silence. Then urgency. "Where are you?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "St. Luke's Hospital." "I'm on my way." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I had spent years keeping Adrien away from my son. But now the only person who could save Noah was the man I had sworn to keep him from. And for the first time since leaving Adrien behind, I was terrified of what came next. The moment Adrien stepped into the hospital, I felt the air shift. He looked frantic, his eyes scanning the hallway until they landed on me. And when they did, everything else seemed to disappear. But I didn't move toward him. I didn't let myself feel the way my heart clenched at the sight of him, at the way he looked, like a man who had just realized he was too late. He rushed forward, stopping just inches from me, his voice tight with fear. "Where is he?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening, and pointed down the hall. Without another word, he walked past me, disappearing into Noah's hospital room. I could have followed. I could have stood there and watched the moment he saw his son, the moment he truly understood everything he had missed. But I didn't. I had spent too many years standing on my own to let Adrien's presence shake me now. Instead, I leaned against the cold hospital wall, pressing a hand to my forehead, trying to quiet the storm inside me. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Then slowly Adrien stepped out of the room. His face was pale, his hands shaking at his sides. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like he finally understood what I had carried all these years. I met his gaze, my voice flat. "He looks like you." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Sabrina, don't." I held up a hand, cutting him off before he could say whatever desperate plea was lingering on his tongue. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't tell me you regret it. Don't stand here and act like this changes anything." His jaw tensed. "It does change things." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "For you maybe. But not for me." I shook my head, arms wrapping around myself as I forced the words out. "I spent years building a life without you, Adrien. I learned how to be a mother without help, without support. I stayed awake every night, terrified I wasn't enough, terrified I would fail. And you were living your life. You were fine." Regret flickered in his eyes. "I wasn't fine." I clenched my jaw. "It doesn't matter." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Adrien exhaled. "I want to be in his life." I felt my heart squeeze, but I didn't let it show. "Noah is my son." My voice was steady, cold. "And I will not let you hurt him the way you hurt me." Adrien flinched like I had struck him, his entire body tensing. "Sabrina, I would never." "You already did." He froze. I took a slow breath, forcing back the lump in my throat. "You chose your life, Adrien. You made your decision. And I made mine." My fingers curled at my sides. "Noah and I are going to be okay. Without you." His eyes darkened with emotion, his jaw tightening like he wanted to argue. But he didn't. Because he knew. He knew I wasn't going to change my mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. Not in agreement. Not in acceptance. But in defeat. I turned before he could say another word, stepping back into Noah's room, closing the door softly behind me. I leaned against it, exhaling slowly, my eyes falling on the little boy asleep in his bed. Noah was safe. Noah was mine. And for the first time in years I felt peace settle in my chest. Adrien was a part of our past. But he would never be a part of our future.